About the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Tuesday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. I'll tell you what, I know I keep saying it. It's late July. It's supposed to be slow, but we have ourselves a jam-packed episode of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. Here is what you need to know about today's show. Going to open a little bit of football, okay? So Michigan, you may remember, Connor Stallions, what happened there? Well, according to a report, they are about to get their notice of allegations, and they may be in some hot water. I'm going to defend Michigan and Connor Stallions because I think this is still a witch hunt a year later. We're going to discuss that. Quick follow-up, by the way, Notre Dame responds to USC trying to cancel that rivalry. And we got to talk a little bit about the freeze warning at Auburn. Have you followed Auburn football recruiting over the last couple days? It is insanity. From there, we will take a quick break, come back, talk a little bit of hoops. Yes, there's still hoops news. Calipari did a press conference following summer workouts at Arkansas. If you listen closely, I think he really likes that team that he has. And oh, by the way, also on top of that, TBT on Monday night, it was wild. We previewed it on the last show. There was a brawl, and we got to get into all of it. We got video that you have to see, but you kind of don't want to see because it's kind of gross. Before we get started, quick reminder, make sure you're subscribed to the Aaron Torres Pod. You can do that on Apple, Spotify. Do your boy a favor, by the way. You want to do Torres a favor? Leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple. Really would help us just move up those algorithms and all that stuff. Also, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Put on notifications for when we go live. We're going to be going live a lot here, especially as we get into September and football. Big plans ahead for football. Big plans ahead as we get back into basketball. We are not slowing down. Appreciate everybody for all of your support. The July numbers are shattering even last year's July numbers. That is a month-over-month trend. Cannot thank you all enough for everything that you've done. With that said, it is a busy Tuesday. There is a lot to discuss. There is no more time to waste. So let's get to the topic of the day. Topic of the day, you know what? Nothing else to say other than football is here. Training camps in the NFL are open. College teams are beginning to report. Florida State actually plays in week 0. I've seen some practice footage out of Tallahassee. So there's a lot going on. We're entering college football time. And of course, we're entering a season in which Michigan is the defending national champions. Michigan, of course, 15-0. They beat Washington in the title game. But it was a season that was sort of marred with controversy. Now, if you listen to this show, I defended Michigan. I thought it at one point became kind of a witch hunt. Well, apparently the witch hunt is not over because the Wolverine.com, that is the affiliate that covers Michigan for On3, put out a report that on sometime this week, maybe by the time you guys and girls listen to this video, clip, podcast, whatever, that Michigan will receive a notice of allegations that is the official letter from the NCAA regarding the Connor Stallions sign-stealing scandal, and that Michigan could be looking at major punishment, including a 1 to 2 year postseason ban. So I want to go ahead and get into it, but I'm not even going to beat around the bush. I'm just going to tell you exactly how I feel, put all my cards on the table. I think this is ridiculous. I think bluntly, Michigan has actually already been punished for this incident. And I think the NCAA is overstepping their bounds. And I hope Michigan fights back. So let's get into it. Last year, if you remember, it was wild at Michigan. And by the way, they were my preseason national championship picks. I appreciate them making me look smart, but just a mentally resilient team in Ann Arbor. Why is that? Well, remember, Jim Harbaugh suspended the first 3 games. That was over Hamburger Gate. Essentially, basically, Jim Harbaugh Michigan paid for some meals for a couple recruits during the COVID period when recruits weren't supposed to be on campus, whatever. Wasn't a big deal. Everybody was doing it. Just ask Jeremy Pruitt, okay? So Jim Harbaugh gets suspended 3 games. He comes back. Michigan is rolling and kicking the crap out of everybody. Then this story starts to circulate. Is there some weird sign-stealing stuff? And we all know what happens from there. Right before Michigan's bye, there's all this rumor about what could have happened. We find out about this guy, Connor Stallions, who, of course, was sending basically a group of buddies to opposing stadiums to record the sidelines of the other team. He ultimately ends up getting fired. Another assistant coach ends up getting fired as well. And oh, by the way, then Jim Harbaugh gets suspended for the 3 biggest games of the year. So at that time, I'll be blunt, I kind of thought this whole thing was over because you had Connor Stallions fired. You had Chris Partridge, the linebackers coach who worked with Connor Stallions, fired, and Jim Harbaugh was suspended for 3 games. But apparently it's not enough. Apparently the notice of allegations is coming out. And I think, again, this is a witch hunt, and I think Michigan should fight back. Now, to be clear, let me make one thing really clear here quickly off the top. Say that 10 times fast, okay? 1, I am not a rule or law breaker, and I do think if you break rules and if you break laws, you have to be punished, okay? You might not like NCAA rules. They might be stupid, whatever. You also might not like it when you get pulled over doing 68 and a 65. Now, if you're a Georgia football player, you're doing 85 and a 65, but that's neither here nor there. But if you get pulled over doing 68 and a 65, you could get mad. But the reality is that you still broke the law. You're still going to get a ticket. So I understand the idea of punishment. Here is where my issue with punishing Michigan is. They already got punished last year. Let's go back to everything that happened in last October and November, because I think it's so easy to forget how wild it got for Michigan football, that program, everything around them. Remember, all that stuff starts to come out heading into Michigan's bye, okay? And you can go back and look. At first, every coach in America kind of defended Michigan. They were like, sign stealing happens everywhere. It's not a big deal, whatever. Matt Rule said it at a press conference in Nebraska. Deion said it at a press conference at Colorado. And so you kind of started to feel like, okay, this is something that happens everywhere. Then all of a sudden, more details come out. Then you realize they broke the rules. But then remember what happened from there. The Big Ten unilaterally decided that the NCAA was not going to move fast enough, and the Big Ten got push from the league's teams, ADs, and coaches to punish Michigan. The essential argument was NCAA punishment moves too slow. Michigan isn't going to be punished for this. They need to be punished for this. And so what did the Big Ten do last year? Remember, there was a moment in time last year. There were 14 teams at the time in the Big Ten. 13 ADs and 13 coaches got on a call with the commissioner and basically pressured the guy, hey, you got to do something. Michigan was not even allowed to be on the call, which is insanity. But then what happens? Going into the Penn State game, biggest game of the season, on the road, Big Ten makes the decision. By the way, not on Monday, not on Tuesday, not on Wednesday. They make the decision while Michigan is flying to play Penn State that they are going to suspend Jim Harbaugh for 3 games. Michigan lands. They don't even know what's going on. There's video of Harbaugh on the tarmac. Like, what the heck just happened? So he's sitting in a hotel room. He ends up getting suspended. And so that's where I have an issue with the NCAA punishing Michigan. This is double freaking jeopardy. Listen, I'm not a lawyer, okay? But at the same time, it's like they got punished. Head coach was suspended 3 games. The guy behind all of it got fired. Another assistant coach got fired. And they overcame it, and they still won a national championship. Let me even take it a step further. The NCAA's logic actually doesn't even really make sense as far as all this Michigan stuff is concerned. Because first off, there's the report from the Wolverine, they could get a postseason ban, but that wins won't be vacated and that the championship won't be vacated. Now, I'm not a vacate wins guy, okay? It's stupid. We know who won. Fill in the blank. We know who won whatever. When Louisville had to take down their banner in 2013, whatever. We know who won. Vacating wins is stupid. Vacating Heisman's is stupid. I'm glad Reggie Bush got his Heisman back. But at the same time, you can't say that if they broke the rules, but the record still, it doesn't even make sense. And then on top of that, how about this? The NCAA actually 3 or 4 years ago, post FBI scandal in college basketball, they rewrote how they do punishments. You can go ahead and look this up. The NCAA basically said, like, look, going forward, we are not going to do postseason bans anymore. We don't believe it's fair to players on existing teams to be punished for things that happened when they weren't there. So they're going again against their own rules after the Big Ten basically made up their rules as they went along. And lastly, let me also say this. Remember, the NCAA has basically acknowledged that the rule that Michigan broke last year was kind of a stupid rule. Again, understand you got to be punished. But what was the rule? The rule was you couldn't travel to be on the sidelines to record other teams' sidelines. And the reason they did that was they deemed it unfair to smaller schools, okay? But since then, they've realized, you know what? This all could be avoided if we just had headset whatever in the helmets of quarterbacks so they could talk directly to the offensive coordinator or the head coach or whoever. And so they've since changed the rule that was broken, basically acknowledging that it was a stupid rule. So again, I just go back to the most basic point. I understand how punishment works. I believe everybody should be punished and held accountable when you break rules, break laws, whatever. But Michigan was held accountable. Connor Stalions was fired. Jim Harbaugh was suspended for the 3 biggest games of the regular season last year. Michigan won all 3. They proved that they weren't winning because of the sign stealing when Connor Stalions was gone and Jim Harbaugh was gone. Then they win the Big Ten, go to the big Rose Bowl, beat Alabama, and beat Washington for a national championship. So this doesn't make sense. It's so stupid. The good news is it appears as though Michigan is going to fight this. And I'll be honest, I do hope that they fight this because it's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's going against the rules that the NCAA has said that they are changing in terms of punishing current players with postseason bans. Fight it, Michigan. Fight it. Listen, I'm no Tom Mars. I'm no legal expert, but I will come on and consult for free because this is stupid and you got to stand up for yourself. All right, let's switch gears. Couple other football topics that I do want to get to. We'll get to basketball. I think today we'll try to make the show a tiny bit quicker. Last episode, Monday's episode, we went really long. It was like an hour 15 without, maybe like an hour 10 without commercials. So we'll try to be a little bit quicker. 2 other stories. So the first story that caught my attention, remember on Monday's show, we talked about USC and Notre Dame. We talked about the idea that Lincoln Riley basically acknowledged at Big Ten Media Days, this Notre Dame thing, we might not be doing it very much longer. And his argument was basically, look, we have to schedule not to please fans, not to keep 100-year-old rivalries together, but to win national championships. And he referenced Alabama. He said, look, Alabama, they play that big early neutral site game. Then they play a couple cupcakes. Then they play the SEC slate. Then they play another cupcake before the rivalry game with Auburn. Well, Lincoln Riley was pretty justifiably, in my opinion, criticized, even though I don't think he was wrong, including on this show. But we did get some response earlier in the day on Tuesday because Notre Dame has heard what Lincoln Riley had to say, and Notre Dame ain't having it. Their AD, Chris Bevilacqua, former TV exec, by the way, spoke with The Athletic, and he said, let's see what he said. I actually just put away the article, so that's kind of silly of me. We don't need to see what he said. But the bottom line is he said, look, we've had communications with USC. We believe the rivalry is going on, and we don't believe there's any reason to think that it's going to stop. And so that's some good news. If you're a college football purist, if you love what college football is supposed to be about, if you love rivalries, if you love history, if you love all that. At the same time, let me also say this. I think two things can be true about this situation. One, I certainly hope that this rivalry stays. It's one of the ones we all love, the Bush Push. There's so many iconic games in this rivalry. But two, even though I criticized Lincoln Riley the other day, what he said isn't totally inaccurate. And I think college football fans have to brace for all of the things that we loved about this sport even 2-3 years ago slowly going to the wayside. Listen, I hope these college football rivalries go on forever. But at this point, you look at USC's schedule, Lincoln Riley isn't really wrong. Just look at this year. So they have the LSU game, which Lincoln Riley tried to get out of. But on top of LSU, just in the Big Ten, they play at Michigan, Penn State at home, Nebraska at home, Wisconsin at home, Washington on the road, UCLA as well in conference. Those are like 5 or 6 really big games. And this comes, by the way, in a season in which they don't play Ohio State and they don't play Oregon. And so the idea that they somehow need Notre Dame is ridiculous. But then beyond that, to Lincoln Riley's point, it's like, dude, what if we're 9-2 going in the final week of the season? I'd rather be playing Cupcake State after the schedule that we played rather than playing Notre Dame. And so I will be curious if this rivalry sticks. But I do think as college football fans, we have to understand the days of big time out of conference games might be sort of kind of going to the wayside. Because if you look at the SEC, if you look at the Big Ten, there's so much power in those two leagues that one, the schedules are insane. But two, there's really no upside to playing an out-of-conference schedule. If you're USC this year and you don't have LSU and you don't have Notre Dame on the schedule, if you go 10-2 with 2 losses in the Big Ten and you play 3 cupcakes out of conference, no one is holding it against you that you played nobody because the Big Ten schedule is so tough. Same with if Alabama canceled their game against Wisconsin this year, if Georgia canceled their game against Clemson this year. As a matter of fact, I'll be honest, if we're being honest, Notre Dame kind of needs that game more than USC does. And so with it, I'm curious what the kind of more the future of Notre Dame is, what the future of the ACC. Can Clemson still get games with Georgia? Will Miami still be able to get a game with Florida State? What if at Florida they say at some point, you know what? We don't need to play Florida State. We play enough good teams in conference. We have to play Tennessee every year. We have to play Georgia every year. We have to play LSU every year. Florida State's nice, but we don't need them necessarily. And so I'll be curious what happens. I'll be curious from the Notre Dame perspective. Listen, Tony Petitti, I just crushed him because I think he completely botched the Michigan situation. If I was him, you know what one of my first orders would be? You don't have to play Michigan, or you don't have to play Notre Dame, if you don't want to, if you're a Big Ten school. It gives them all the benefit and us none of it. By the way, it might be some pressure to put Notre Dame in the league. But I thought it was interesting. I'm not as sold that this thing is on its deathbed. Lincoln Riley took a lot of heat. Should at least acknowledge that Notre Dame side, they think this thing is going on. But again, Notre Dame kind of needs this game more than USC. You look at Notre Dame's schedule this year. They play Florida State as part of that relationship with the ACC. They play Texas A&M to open the season, and they play USC, and that's kind of it. A lot of Navies, a lot of Armies, a lot of not very good teams. And so from the USC perspective, I don't blame them if they want out. Good news is it doesn't look like it's going anywhere. One quick football story. Last football story before we get to some hoops, because Calipari spoke this week and he had some very interesting things to say about his team. Plus, we got to talk a little bit about that TBT event on Monday night. But you see that guy on that screen right there. That's my man, Hugh Freeze. And if you've listened to this show for a long time, you know Hugh Freeze, friend of the show. But listen, I don't think I give him any sort of preferential treatment or whatever. I think he's a good football coach. I think he's the right man for Auburn. But I bring it up because this past weekend was the final recruiting weekend of the summer in college football. We talked a little bit about it on Monday's show. David Sanders, the 5-star offensive tackle, was at Nebraska. All of these schools were having big events to try to get their commitments and their recruits on campus. Well, Auburn hosted their own event called Big Cat Weekend. One, it's kind of like the OG of summer recruiting events. Like this thing's been going on since the Gene Chizik days. But then two, My man Hugh Freeze went to work on Saturday and Sunday because I'll tell you what, poor Hayes Fawcett, man, was working overtime. I think he put Hayes Fawcett in a casket. That poor kid was working so hard because Auburn just absolutely crushed over the weekend. And it's worth noting, coming off that 2024 recruiting class, which was top 10 in the country, really top 5, we're going to explain in a minute. They now have a top 5 class in 2025 and a top 5 class in 2026. And the bottom line is, listen, actually, they have the number 1 class in 2026. Excuse me. I apologize, Auburn fans. You have the right to be mad at me for whiffing on that one. Top 5 class in 2024, top 5 class in 2025, and they got the number 1 class right now in 26. Shout out to my man Freeze there. We got a little bit of a freeze warning down on the plains there, okay? So let's get into it. And I mentioned on Monday's show, I don't talk a ton of football recruiting on this show, simply because if you really look at it, in basketball, right, you can have one player can change the trajectory of an entire program. Football, it's really about stacking not just good players together, but then doing it class after class after class. So you could have a top 5 class in 2021, but if you got a top 30 class in 22, you're not competing 2 or 3 years down the road. Well, what Hugh Freeze is doing, to his credit, I think he's slowly starting to put Auburn in position where maybe a year or two from now, they're going to be in basically the old John Rothstein saying. They're kind of in position to be in position down the road. First off, mentioned he closed 2024 with a bang. He closed 2023 with a bang, but 2024 first full class, and to his credit, on National Signing Day, that was a top 5 class at the end of signing day. Now, with transfers and stuff, it's now like a top 9, top 10 class. Freeze didn't go heavy in the portal, but that was a class that was stacked. Cam Coleman is a stud, okay? And then Freeze did work right around signing day. Maris Williams, the defensive lineman, flipped from Florida to Auburn. Jamonte Waller flipped from Florida to Auburn. Perry Thompson, the wide receiver, flipped from Bama to Auburn during the summer. So that 2024 class was really good. But let's get to some of what he did over the weekend, because this 2025 class is really coming together, okay? So over the weekend, among the things that Auburn did, here's what you need to know. Derek Smith, 4-star, was committed to Bama, flipped him, now committed to Auburn. Antonio Coleman of the famed Hayes Fawcett graphic, because he once upon a time committed to Alabama, then flipped to Auburn, then flipped back to Bama when Kalen DeBoer took over. Well, he flipped back to Auburn this weekend. 4 commitments, 2 schools. Auburn is in the lead right now. And then on Monday, another big one, Anquan Fagans, 4-star defensive back from Alabama. And so what's interesting is top 5 class in 2024, currently now a top 5 class in 2025. And it's also worth noting 2026, as I said, they got 3 big-time commitments in 2026. And with it, they have the number 1 class in the country in 2026. One other very interesting note, by the way, is that Freeze is largely locking down Alabama. We've talked a lot about Alabama on this show. Number 1 class at one point. Well, with the flips, they're no longer number 1. But what I find very interesting, in this 2025 class, of the top 10 players in the state of Alabama, 7 of them are committed to Auburn. Interestingly enough, and there's another conversation for another day, 2 are committed to Ohio State. 1 is uncommitted, but expected to commit this weekend to Auburn. And on top of it, none are committed to Bama. So Freeze is doing work. And listen, if you're an Auburn fan, and our producer Matt, for people who don't know, is in fact an Auburn fan. He's all of a sudden the Auburn gear came back out for this episode after Freeze went on his little recruiting run over the weekend. But why I bring it up is because I just find all of these conversations so interesting as we enter this 12-team playoff era. Because if this was 3, 4, 5 years ago with Freeze, he's got the Freeze, the Freeze on top of the lid there on the graphic. But if this was 3, 4, 5 years ago, I don't know that all of this recruiting makes that much of a difference. You have the rivalry game with Georgia. You have the rivalry game with Bama. And so the road was just so tough to win the SEC and make that 14 college football playoff. But Hugh Freeze is recruiting a roster that if it can stay together, and I know recruiting stuff always kind of changes, and guys flip back, and we'll see what happens as we get closer to signing day, and certainly we'll see what happens in 2026. But what we can't deny is that he is putting together a roster that can compete at the top of the SEC. Maybe not this year, because what Brian Harsin left was a total mess. And maybe next year they're still pretty young. But what did I say? You have to put class upon class upon class to be in the mix. Well, he's doing that. And in the 12-team playoff era, even if the schedule is brutal every year, even if Alabama's on the schedule every year, even if Georgia's on the schedule every year, and by the way, talking about all these changes in college football, I hope those rivalry games stay. I know Auburn fans might want to get out of one or two of them, but I hope those rivalry games stay. But you don't have to be undefeated. You don't have to sweep Georgia and Bama. You don't have to hope that Kalen DeBoer's a dud and Bama falls apart. All you got to do is be 9-3, 10-2, be in the mix, be the third, fourth best team, and you are going to have a shot in the SEC to make the college football playoff. So I want to get to some basketball, but we got to give credit where it's due, man. Listen, football recruiting, you got to follow the trends. It's not just about one player. It's about, can you stack really good players together in one class and then do it over a 2, 3, 4-year period? Well, we now got one really good class last year. By the way, Freeze again did pretty well in 23, closing out on that one. Really good class in 24, trending as a top 5 class in 25 and 26. We'll see what happens from there. All right, so what I want to do, take a quick break, come back. When we come back, we are going to switch gears, talk a little hoops. John Calipari, first marquee-ish press conference really since he took the job at Arkansas. If you listen to that press conference, it is pretty clear that he likes his team. Talk about that, and then we got to talk TBT, baby, because TBT was insanity on Monday night. That is right. Brawl in Louisville, Freedom Hall. Quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. Hi, back. Good to be back. So do want to go ahead and get to a little bit of hoops news. I know I say it every single show. We're slowly getting off the hoops, but stuff keeps popping up. And I want to talk about something that came out on Monday, because John Calipari did kind of his first press conference that he's basically done since he took that Arkansas job back in whatever it was, early April. So summer workouts are finishing across the country. I mean, it's really, I said it a few days ago, but August really is kind of the slowest time in all of college hoops. Players are off campus, coaches, it's the only vacation they kind of get because it comes after summer workouts where, remember, you get 8 weeks, 4 hours a week to work out your players. So Arkansas just finished their workouts over the weekend, and John Calipari did a press conference kind of talking about this 2024-2025 team, his first team at Arkansas. And let me just say this. Thought there were a lot of interesting things that were actually said. And two, I can tell you this. I've been watching Calipari press conferences for a very long time. And I am here to tell you, that man right there, oh, he really likes his team. So first off, let me give Calipari credit for this, okay? Listen, we know how press conferences work. You don't really reveal that much. One of the reporters, I believe it was Kevin McPherson, longtime guy who's covered the beat forever. Kevin McPherson was like, can you give me just a little breakdown of the guys and who looked good and who didn't? And Cal kind of went player by player and gave an honest evaluation of where those guys are at this point in the summer. Couple things that stood out. First of all, Trevin Brazil is a player that was a holdover, I guess. Calipari doesn't like calling him a holdover. Basically, Calipari assumed that he was leaving. He re-recruited him. He decides to come back. But he was a player who was playing really well 2 seasons ago, goes down with a knee injury, comes back, and was really inconsistent this past year. Well, Cal was like, dude, that guy is way better than I thought he was. 6'10", can handle the ball, can do whatever. Mentioned that Boogie Flan, much better than he thought that he was. Mentioned that Adu Thiero has been playing really well. So one, I thought gave very honest evaluations of all his players. As somebody in the media, I always appreciate when a coach kind of gives you more than you're expecting. And so he did that there. Two, I thought it was interesting because he really kind of broke down the idea of what he believes summer is. Now, I know for Kentucky fans, and I'm sure there's a few in the chat right now, they're going to yell and scream and say, Cal wastes the summer and he doesn't do much. But he basically said, like, look, a lot of coaches like to put in plays and run sets and do whatever. He goes, our goal is to just make you the best player that you can over the summer. So you come back knowing what your potential is, and then we put the team together. Let's get the best out of you that we possibly can, and then we're going to figure it all out when you get back in the fall. Again, know a lot of Kentucky fans don't like that. I thought it was a very interesting approach, and he talked a lot about that. Gave honest feedback about the guys in that program. Said, again, Trevin Brazil, I love him. I don't want him standing outside shooting threes. He's 6'11". He can dunk over anybody. He needs to be at the rim, making plays at the rim. I thought it was interesting. Already seeing pushback from the Big Blue community because he said that he doesn't want Big Z shooting threes in the summer. He said, I know you can do that, but the bottom line is it's great that you can do that. But if you can't make a 5-foot floater in the lane, if you can't hit an elbow jumper, I don't want you shooting 25 feet away. I need you to be able to make sure you can make 8 feet in before you're worried about shooting threes. So thought that was interesting, that it's not really about having everything figured out right now. It's about the individuals being better and coming together. In my opinion, it also now makes a lot more sense. I had never really thought about it, about why Cal's teams generally get better as the season goes on. Now, I know what a Kentucky fan will say. We lost the first weekend in the tournament. He's terrible. I hate his guts. He's the worst ever. Okay, cool. But would you not argue that the team was pretty good down the stretch? Because I remember watching final game of the regular season at Tennessee. Tennessee was the SEC regular season champs. Kentucky won at Tennessee. I remember in February, they played at Auburn. Auburn was the SEC tournament champs. Kentucky ended up winning at Auburn. I remember Kentucky playing Alabama. Alabama ended up in the Final Four. Kentucky ran them out of the gym. So the team was clearly better down the stretch. It did not work out well in March. Cal needs to be held accountable for it. I said at the time, he's not living up to the standard of Kentucky basketball, but you also can't deny he had you in position. And so I found it interesting that he's like, this summer is not what you think it's about. It's about getting all these guys the best version of themselves. But what I'll also say, and I think this is important, in my opinion, I have been watching Calipari press conferences now. I've been watching Calipari press conferences for a long time, probably like closing in on 15 years at this point. And by the way, I just went on social media and saw a Kentucky article complaining about how they're using Big Z already. It's practice. Chill out. But I bring it up because I've been watching Calipari press conferences a long time. And it is very clear to me that he is very confident in the team, and I think that he should be. First off, when that final 9 came together, I thought it was very interesting. I said it at the time. I said, I think that's the best 9-man roster in all of college basketball. I haven't backed down from that. Alabama's deeper. Kansas might be a little bit deeper. UConn might be a little bit deeper. But 1 through 9, that's a darn good team. The 3 transfers that he brought from Kentucky, DJ Wagner, Adu Thiero, and Big Z. The 3 freshmen that he brought in, Boogie Fland, Carter Knox, and Billy Richmond. And also the 2 transfers, really 3 if you can include Brazil, who was there, entered the portal and came back, Nelly Davis from FAU, and Jonas Adu. And I was thinking about this as we start to wrap the show. We'll talk TBT here in a minute. But I was thinking about this. This is an interesting thought to me. And again, it speaks to, I think he really, really likes this team. But I was thinking about this, is he's gotten all this criticism, especially over the last couple of years because of the freshmen. Too many freshmen, sports changing, whatever. This has to be the first year outside of 21-22. And if you remember that season, there was no on-the-road high school recruiting the year before, so everybody went portal heavy in 21-22. That was the year Kentucky had Oscar Tshiebwe, Kellen Grady, etc. But this has to be the first year that I don't think John Calipari is going to be relying on freshmen in a big way to make a major contribution. Now, if Carter Knox is awesome, that's great. If Boogie Fland is awesome, that's great. But the counter to that is that if you look at that roster, the best players on that team are experienced, and the best players on that team have NCAA tournament experience. If I had to guess right now, in some order, who are going to be the top 4 scorers on that team for Arkansas, probably play the 4 biggest minutes. 1's going to be Nelly Davis. 2's going to be Jonas Adu. 3's going to be Adu Thiero. 4 is going to be DJ Wagner. What do all 4 of those guys have in common? Well, Nelly Davis, he's experienced. Made a Final Four at Florida Atlantic a few years ago, was a star on that team. I think he's going to be Arkansas's best player. Jonas Adu, he was the only guy Cal didn't really talk about. Cal was like, dude, he was an all-SEC guy. You all know how good he is. But that's now going into his 4th year of college basketball. Made an Elite 8 this year. Isn't going to be intimidated on that big stage in the NCAA tournament. Beyond that, Adu Thiero, 3rd year in college basketball, played in 2 NCAA tournaments. I think he is going to be a star for that team. Coach Cal said, look, he's starting to look like his dad who played for me a million years ago. And then also DJ Wagner. I think, DJ Wagner to me, I've said it a million times this summer, I think is one of the most underappreciated and undervalued players in all of college basketball. What did I just say a minute ago? Kentucky was really good late in the season. They were also really good at the beginning of the season. You know the part that they struggled? It wasn't when you think it was. It wasn't that Calipari stinks. It wasn't this. It was when DJ Wagner got hurt. That was when they went on the 3-game losing streak at home. Lose to Florida at home, no DJ Wagner. Lose to Tennessee at home, no DJ Wagner. Lose to Gonzaga at home, DJ Wagner comes back but barely plays. This kid, if he can stay healthy, I think he's going to be really good. And as I said, it seemed pretty clear to me that John Calipari likes this team. Listen, we got a lot of football to talk about over the next 4 or 5 months. I think this is going to be as entertaining a basketball season as we've had in some time. There is a lot of talent at the top of the sport. Alabama, UConn, Kansas. I think Kentucky's going to be better than people think. The Big 12 is loaded. Houston, Iowa State, Baylor, Arizona now in the Big 12. But I'm fascinated for these SEC wars. And I think Arkansas behind Alabama is as good as anybody in the conference. All right, really quick. We got to go ahead and talk about a topic that we talked about on Sunday night, Monday's show. So I mentioned on Monday's show, I said, I've never talked TBT on this podcast before. Never talked TBT. That was until Monday, and it was because there was a very highly anticipated game between the Louisville TBT team and the Kentucky TBT team. And if you remember, what do we talk about with TBT? TBT is the basketball tournament. It's alums of all these schools. The only rule is you can't currently be on an NBA roster, and you play for $1 million grand prize. And so all these schools are into it. My alma mater, UConn, has a team for the first time. Kansas has had a team forever. Syracuse has had a team forever. And on Monday, Kentucky's team was playing Louisville's team. And we talked about it at the time. We discussed the fact that it was going to set a record in terms of crowd attendance. I gave the number over 10,000 and ended up being 13,000 and change at Freedom Hall. Well, I'll tell you what, the 13,000 and change that were in attendance, they got their money's worth. Kentucky ends up winning the game. Andrew Harrison, who hit so many big shots during his career, shot to send Kentucky to the Final Four back in 2014, I guess it would have been. Well, guess what? He hits the game winner. They run off the court in celebration. So it was a great game, a great finish, great crowd. But here's the crazy part. Did you see what happened after the game? Andrew Harrison hits the shot. Remember, they have the Elam ending, which is basically you don't play until a buzzer. You play to a certain number. So going into the final few minutes, they say that the target number is 90 or 80 or 68 or 72 or whatever. And the first team to get there ends up winning the game. Well, Andrew Harrison hits a buzzer beater. The crowd goes crazy. Half of it's Louisville red, half of it's Kentucky blue. And then pure insanity goes crazy. We'll get to the video in a minute, producer Matt. For people watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see the video. But Nate Sestina, who was a star in this game, 22 points, 6 3-pointers, he celebrates by doing the L's down. Tyler Ulis, the head coach of the Kentucky team, does the L's down. Well, Onuaku from Louisville was not happy with this behavior. And here is what happened after Onuaku told Nate Sestina to stop with the L's down. That video courtesy of WLEX. And as you just saw, the Louisville team, Onuaku, gave his own version of Hawk Tua. He spit on that thing, baby, because that was nasty as the Louisville player spits on the Kentucky players at the end of the TBT game. And let me say this. First of all, I don't condone spitting on people. That's disgusting. Although, you know, if there's a Hawk Tua situation in your private life and you're into that thing, that's okay. But at the same time, don't condone spitting on people in the course of the game. Now, he did apologize on Tuesday, excuse me. This, of course, after essentially going on a Twitter rant at like 2 a.m, complaining about everything. Tyler Ulis then went on Twitter and said, hey, man, y'all were talking smack all game. You had what's coming to you. I don't want to hear excuses for you and your behavior and what you decided to do. So Onuaku apologizes for it, but it's not really an apology. It's not anything that anybody really buys into. And it just led to just a fascinating, wild situation in that TBT. And so a couple of things stand out when I look back on how this whole thing ended. One, if that ain't proof, if Monday night is not proof that Louisville, Kentucky is the best rivalry in college basketball, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. Because I said it the other day. Listen, Duke, Carolina is great. I get it. But most of Duke's alums, most of Duke's students, they come from Jersey and New York and Connecticut and wherever. They come down to Duke, do 4 years there, then go back up and work on Wall Street, okay? They're not living in North Carolina on top of UNC fans. And I've been to Kentucky. I've been to Louisville. I've been there half a dozen times. Going to probably go again for a game this year, hopefully, knock on wood. Bring it up because those people are on top of each other. Louisville has a lot of red. There's a lot of blue, excuse me. It is a crazy state with a crazy passion for college basketball. And even before the game ended in the manner that it did, 13,000 people in July to watch a bunch of alums. That shows you that this is the best rivalry going in college basketball. 2, I'd also add, I thought it was really cool. The current Kentucky players were actually in the building, and they all spent all Monday talking about how they can't wait to be part of that rivalry. So all these kids, Lamont Butler from San Diego State, Kobe Brea from Dayton, whoever, they got a front row view of what it is like and what that rivalry means to that state. Finally, my last real thought, goodness gracious, that's a moment for TBT, okay? And it's wild because I think about this summer, and I might have mentioned to lead the show, I can't remember. But it's crazy because this summer has kind of proved, like, sports doesn't really take any time off, okay? I remember sitting there the night of the NBA Finals ending, and I don't even really watch that much NBA basketball, and I was like, damn, the heck am I going to do here for the next 2.5 months until football starts? Then we got Copa, and Copa was kind of awesome, and the Euros were awesome, and we got some Summer League with Bronny and Reed Shepherd and Donovan Clingan and whatever. We got the Olympics right now. Maybe talk even a little Olympics after this. But TBT, it's been this thing that's gone on, and I feel like this is the year it's kind of broken out. I think having teams from Kentucky, having teams from Louisville, having teams from UConn, I think has helped. Credit to Fox. I work for Fox Sports Radio. I don't make any of the TV decisions, but it's gone over to Fox, and Fox has prioritized this event, and it was looking for a moment. Now, you don't want fist flying and spit flying, but that was a moment. That was a thing that people that are not Louisville and Kentucky fans were talking about on Monday and Tuesday. So congrats to the Kentucky team. They have advanced to now the Final Four, I guess, is in Philadelphia. 2 more games tonight in Houston. But yeah, don't know what else there is to say about that TBT ending, but that was wild. Really quickly, first of all, producer Matt, if there's any interesting questions, let me know. I know that, I'm sure the comments have devolved. By the way, I hope everybody's enjoying the Olympics. I'll say this, I'm really into the Olympics. The wife gets into the, some of the gymnastics and stuff. Listen, if it makes me a loser to sit there and support Team USA, I've been having a blast. We were watching the women's gymnastics 2 nights ago. The men's gymnastics was actually awesome. What was his name? Frankie Flips. Sounds like a mobster, but he's the U.S. gymnast. He was awesome on Monday night at all his routines. So that's been fun. Team USA women will compete on Tuesday night. I'll be watching that. Hope you enjoyed the Olympics. By the way, a couple other notes. Chase Budinger, former Arizona basketball player, NBA player, is playing Team USA beach volleyball. He was a volleyball high school legend, played college basketball, played in the NBA, is now playing beach volleyball. So there's all sorts of stuff going on in the Olympics. Producer Matt, anything interesting before we get out of here? Looks like it's just a lot of angry people. It's a lot of people angry about some other stuff. So I'll tell you what. I think what we'll do, go ahead and get out of here. A little bit of a faster show today. Still gave you 45 minutes of really good content, but time for us to go. If you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, do me a favor. Please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure that you are subscribed. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead, give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure that you are following on social media. Aaron_Torres on Twitter. Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram. Aaron Torres Podcast. Well, Aaron Torres Pod on TikTok as well. I'll tell you what, our TikTok channel is kind of blowing up a little bit this week, thanks to Kirby Smart and that reckless group that he's got down there in Athens. But I'll tell you what, I think that's all for today's show. I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Redick, NBA head coach. Unblock me, bruh. I'll be back Thursday night.